Welcome to today's episode of Between Neens and Deens. My name is Nina, and I'm joined by my best friend, partner, and baby daddy, Dayon.
And together, we're a couple of 20-something-year-olds just trying to navigate this whole first-time parenting thing.
So we're laying it all out there and talking about all the things you wish your parents told you about love, sex, and happiness. So this week we are talking all about raising an interracial baby. I asked you guys a couple weeks ago what you guys wanted to hear about, and this comment made by my friend Cicely actually got the most likes on that Instagram post. So we are diving into it. Obviously, this is something that we've talked about before. Mm-hmm. You being white, European, me being Asian, Vietnamese, I guess.
With cultural differences.
Yeah, we have cultural differences, racial differences. I mean, even like me growing up American and you being Canadian, you know, like those are different too, but obviously that's not drastic. Well, that's not what makes up a mixed race baby. That's just cultural differences.
That just makes a dual citizen.
Yeah, that makes a dual citizen. But yeah, I mean, it's something that we've thought about, something that we've talked about, and it's a loaded one, you know, because like this is Blue's whole identity. This is going to be what he struggles to understand for a really big chunk, if not all of his life, you know, like even thinking about identity from my own perspective before we kind of dive into what I guess it might be like for him or how we want to approach it with him. Like from our own perspective, growing up Vietnamese American, it was hard, you know, like those are two dual identities. And even though I am made up racially by one race, I'm just fully Vietnamese. Like there's, you know, some Chinese, maybe some Cambodian back there, but both of my parents identify as Vietnamese. And so growing up, even like there's so much that you're constantly battling with. And even today, like sometimes I constantly feel like, am I Vietnamese enough? You know, like it sucks for me that I don't know the language. That like my competency as far as Vietnamese is like probably a 3-year-old. You know, it's like I know đi tắm, ăn, cơm. Like I know like really basic words that my mom would say. She
can order food at a restaurant.
Yeah, like I can order food and I can, you know, I can teach Blue, like I can say all those things. I can tell him to go take a bath. I can tell him to eat rice, you know, like I can tell him all those basic things, but that's as far as it really goes because for my parents, it's not that they ever, like, framed it as, like, you should be proud of or you should be ashamed of your identity. Like, I think they did want me to be proud of myself as a Vietnamese person, but it was more of, like, we want you to be proud and less of, like, actually implementing it in ways. So, like, the language wasn't really drilled into us. It was more important for us to like excel at English and like not speak with an accent and things like that. And so, yeah, like we didn't retain the language and it's not my parents' fault. You know, we didn't want to learn it either, but I feel like I wish that they had like pushed through a little bit more and like kind of forced us to learn the language because I would be I don't know, I would just like, I would like to speak the language and I would like to pass that down because to me, I feel like culture is passed down through language, through food, through family, you know? And I can make some Vietnamese food. Not even really. I don't really make Vietnamese food now. Yeah. You know, like my mom has all of that in her head and I constantly say that I need to learn all the recipes from her, but they're all in there. I don't have them. And yeah, I definitely do struggle with my own identity. So I can barely begin to imagine what it's like to grow up mixed race. And for Blue, it's, you know, Vietnamese, Serbian, American, Canadian. Like, what does that look like? Like, that's a lot. That's a lot of conflicting identities.
It's really difficult for us to know what that's really like. Like, we can only assume. Yeah. And that's like, yeah, even for me, I say I would have a similar experience where, like, am I Serbian enough? Because when I do go back home, I do always feel kind of like, you know, the outsider, they still call me, oh, the Canadian. You know what I mean? Like, I'm always the Canadian when I'm there. But even though I do speak the language fluently, it's just interesting in that sense where even though we come from a certain race, but, like, because where we grew up, completely, like, it is hard for us to even find that sense of belonging. So I can imagine that it's even harder when you're mixed and you're torn between, not torn, but you're not necessarily belonging to either or. Yeah. You know what I mean? You're kind of your own thing. Well, it also depends
on it. I mean, it depends on so many different things. It's not only how you feel about yourself, but it's also public perception. So, like, I mean, as Blue is right now, like, obviously he's going to look so different, and sometimes he's going to look more like me and more like you, and therefore more Asian or more white. Like, we don't really know what he's going to look like.
Yeah.
And so if he kind of keeps on the same trajectory that he's on right now, then he looks much more white. And so his identity and the way that people perceive him is going to be very much white passing. So that when he tells people, hey, I'm actually Serbian Vietnamese, it will probably be met with like, no, like, what? Really? Like, and it's kind of downplaying like that other side of your identity, you know, like, or if he looks more Asian in the future, then people would like maybe wouldn't believe that he's Serbian, you know? And I feel like it's always hard because it's not just trying to figure out who you are, but it's also constantly being told by other people what you are. And I think it's like hard to really like tune that out, because even for me, like when I went to university and I was surrounded by a lot more Vietnamese people because I joined like the Vietnamese Student Society, and I really wanted that. Like I wanted to be more immersed in my culture, kind of like be around more people that, you know, share a similar cultural or ancestral background. And I was met with a lot of like, oh, but you're very like whitewashed, or you're very like, you're not like not really Vietnamese, you know? Rude. Yeah, or like my name is Nina, you know, and I have a middle name that's Vietnamese, but like my given first name is not a Vietnamese one. And so yeah, I mean, I constantly struggled with not being Vietnamese enough, and then on top of that, people telling you that you're not Vietnamese enough. And so like I can imagine that we also have friends we have a lot of friends actually that are white and Asian mixed. No one that's specifically Vietnamese and Serbian, but we do have a lot of friends. Most of them are female. And we actually asked one of them what her experience was like growing up mixed race. Yeah. And she was saying that your whole life, you're categorized as white if it's convenient for them, and you're categorized as Asian if it's convenient for them. And so for it's never for other people. Yeah. So it's, you know, sometimes it's like, oh no, you're like us, depending on, or like you're like them, depending on whatever is most convenient. And I think that's I think that's what's complicated about having really fluid identities, is that it's whatever is most convenient to other people, and like who gets to dictate what it is that you are. And I think that is the struggle for a lot of mixed race people, is finding a sense of belonging, but also constantly being met with people that feel as if they're the gatekeepers to identity, you know? Like, who has the right to tell you that you aren't this enough or not that enough? And I think that's like a really long struggle, and for some people a lifelong battle to like deal with those two conflicting things, or like just having people tell you constantly, or like seeking validation from other people. I think is like really hard. So
it's difficult when you go down that route, because it's really hard to ever get that validation. Because
well, that's the thing, you never will. Like everyone's gonna feel a certain way about you and your existence, you know? Like, it's also in Vancouver or in San Francisco, like people are pretty much very accepting of mixed race people, in my experience. I mean, there might be prejudices or assumptions that we've kind of just talked about them, but there are still places in the world, and in America and probably in Canada, where it's a lot less accepted, where it's kind of looked at as like, why, you know? And that is something that he's also going to have to deal with, that we'll never understand. Like, we can get on board with like, yes, like understanding your identity, but we will never really understand what it's like for them, or for them, if we have multiple children.
Yeah. It's a difficult one. It's like, how do we necessarily approach it? Like, I think we talk about it a lot, and I think the way that we want to approach it is just to constantly like stay educated and listen to our listen to our child's point of view, and like be able to listen to them, because it is something that just we won't understand. We don't understand. You know what I mean? So,
but I think it's also like, I think in the, like, as they grow older, you listen to them. But I think when they're really young, like, what we know is that children starting from the age of, I mean, honestly, even before 3, like now at Blue's age being like 4 months, like he can notice differences in like skin color, in features, things like that. And that's like very apparent like by the time they're 3. And so for a lot of people that feel like they don't want to talk about race with their children or identify differences or just point them out as what they are, like I feel like that's a huge disservice to young children, because especially if you have a biracial or like mixed race baby, because you're just erasing their identity. If you're, you know, like for people that want to say that they raised their kids colorblind, like that's a huge disservice, because all you're doing is saying you don't really exist. I don't see you. Like I don't see color. Therefore you don't exist. You know, like your struggles, everything that you will be confronted with doesn't exist. I don't see it.
Yeah, I think it's definitely important to, you know, teach him about his cultures and make sure that he can embrace that as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that like I was talking about language before, and I think that's a huge one. And as it is right now, he will learn Serbian because I know it. Because you know and it.
My parents
and your parents are here. And he will grow up in closer proximity to your family, your whole side of the family. And I currently don't have anybody. I have no family here. And so and
COVID has blocked off the border, so...
Yeah, I mean, we don't know what the future is going to be like. I don't know if it's going to be increasingly more difficult for me to see my parents and to just see my family in general. So as of right now, I am the only culture. I'm the only tie to ancestry. I'm the only tie to culture that he has. And it honestly makes me very sad. And I think a lot of it that I've kind of mentioned does have to do with my own relationship to my identity.
Yeah.
And it just makes me sad that, like... I was expecting that my parents would teach him the language, that like he would at least be surrounded by the food that I grew up with, but he won't even have that, because even if COVID clears up and even if we're able to travel, like we still don't live in San Francisco. We don't live with my family. And so like he will only see them once, maybe twice a year. And in my opinion, I don't know if that's enough to have a solid understanding of what his Vietnamese side is, you know?
How do you feel about potentially having him go to like a class or a school to teach him Vietnamese language and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, like I know that
Do you think that would be weird, because in the same time you don't necessarily understand it? So
yeah, I thought about that, because like I remember when I was in UBC, I was applying for jobs and I found a bunch of like au pair jobs or like nanny jobs, and they all wanted you to be bilingual. And I mean, no one really wanted their child to learn Vietnamese, because I don't know how useful it is, but pretty much everyone either wanted Mandarin as number 1 or Spanish or French. And so yeah, like I was like, oh my god, that actually would be so cool, because I grew up with a girl, actually I knew her in high school, and she is white to my understanding, but her nanny growing up was Spanish speaking, so she's like completely fluent in Spanish, and I'm like, that's the coolest thing ever. So I always thought adds
to your cool factor.
Yeah, and I always thought that like maybe I would do that one day, like with my child, like get them a nanny that teaches them another language. But then I realized that if they learn Vietnamese, it's amazing, because they'll have that connection to that part of themselves, but I wouldn't even be able to communicate with them. And I've tried many times, and maybe I just never took it seriously enough, but also like
it's never too late.
So the thing is I've tried many times to like download like apps and things that will teach you Vietnamese,
like on your phone.
Like on my phone. I've downloaded them and I've tried to do them. But normally the apps that do exist is Vietnamese with a northern accent, because that's kind of the dominant dialect, I guess, that came out of Vietnam, just post-war. And my parents are both from the South, and even though a lot of the words are similar, the accent is just quite different, and sometimes it's hard for me to understand, because it's a very different accent from like, it's kind of, to me, I feel like the equivalent of growing up in the States and knowing American sounding English and then trying to learn English from like Scotland. Like it's the same words, it just sounds very different to me. And so I have tried, but I also am just like, am I gonna even be learning the same language that I can even speak to my parents? You know? So like maybe these are just excuses, but every single time that I'm confronted with these things, like I just get more and more like beaten down on like, you know what, like what's the point? So like I feel like
that actually reminds me of when I was in Serbia, like a lot of the channels there was like Croatian channels, and then like I wanted to learn more like fluency in regards to like having like conversation with friends and stuff, and a lot of the words that I did learn was like Croatian words, and you know, using that outside while I'm in Serbia, and then not really even realizing that those certain words are Croatian words. And then some people could be like, why are you using like Croatian words? You know what I mean? But I'm just learning that off of TV. So that's like the thing where it's like, you know, the app was popularized like the Northern Vietnamese language. And like you don't even realize what the differences may be. And like that was me with like, because like Croatian and Serbian essentially is like the same language. But then there's certain like, I guess like slangs or different words that just like, you know, it's still understood, but it's just like used by those cultures exclusively. So
well, that's the thing, is that like for both of our cultures and the difference in language, it's so political. You know, like
that's
it's
the thing,
and I think this is actually so funny, like so in I feel like I was actually about to say this earlier, and I don't even remember if I actually did say it, but in my most recent Instagram post, I was like doing like our baby photos, and I was like, who does Blue look more like? And then one of the hashtags I used was Serbo-Vietnamese baby, and I like clicked on the hashtag to see if anybody else, like, and I searched for Serbian-Vietnamese anything, and nothing showed up. So I mean, I'm sure there has to be at least one other person in the world that's Serbian Vietnamese, and they're just not on Instagram.
He might be the only one, dude.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's possible.
But it's interesting because I'm like, just thinking about the two of us coming together and the kind of different histories that our cultures, or I guess our countries have had with like communism. Like they're so different that I can see why it had never happened before.
It's hilarious that was our first conversation on our first date too, was about communism.
Yeah, because like former Yugoslavia was, I mean,
it was a socialist communist state. It was called
communism, but it was really socialist.
Yeah.
And Vietnam was and still is technically a communist country, but my parents being from the South really don't like communism, and so Dan's tried to talk to my dad about it, and I'm just like, no, hot topic, stop, avoid, abort. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I feel like it's so politically tied, language and like our cultures and things like that, and I don't even know if that's something that Blue would ever have to deal with. It's something that we've talked about, and we're kind of like, oh yes, we just have different countries that have experiences with it, but okay. But yeah, I don't know what it's going to be like to kind of really meld the two cultures together.
I think it'll be really fun to start if he is genuinely curious about the history of our countries. Like I am quite excited to teach him about. Yeah,
well, Dayan's like taught me so much about. You're like really gassed on history, so.
Yeah, there was like a night too where I like wanted to do so much research on Vietnam, because I just like there's a lot that I just don't know about.
But that's the thing, is that like you have to understand, this is getting really off topic, but you do have to understand that history is written by the victors. Yeah. And where are you getting your sources? You know, if you want to learn about America and you're watching American documentaries, what documentaries are you watching? You know, like, because there's no such thing as like unbiased history. There isn't, because it's written by somebody. And what perspective is that? You know, like if I want to learn about Yugoslavia and all I learned was from the context of Croatian and Bosnian people in the war, I may not understand a perspective from Serbia. And so then so I think that.
Or if you look at American perspective.
Yeah, so like with anything, you know, any country, you have to wonder, like, are you getting the source from the people, or are you getting the source from somebody on the outside looking in? Yeah.
I just try to look at all the facts, but anyways.
But what are facts? That's what I'm trying to get at. There's no such thing as fact. Like, there's always two sides of the story. It's like, even if we get into an argument and we both, because it's tied to emotion, it's tied to, you know,
it's tied to intention, it's tied
but it's also like, do you have the best memory? Do you have a reliable memory? People do not, you know? Yeah, it's just, we're really off topic now.
All right, let's talk about raising a biracial baby. That is what the topic is.
Yeah, I just want to circle back to like what we were talking about earlier about other people's perception of you, because it's really, really powerful, especially as like a young person, even like pre-puberty, pre your angsty teen years, you know, like as a young child, you believe what it is that other people perceive you to be. You know, you're building your whole world, your whole sense of, even if we took race out of it, you know, you're building a sense of who am I based off what people are telling you about yourself. And so I think that's where I sometimes do worry, and I don't even know if this is like a fair thing to worry, but I do worry that if he is very white passing, he'll grow up thinking that he's just Serbian, that he's just white. And
based on like the grandparents taking care of him and stuff.
No, it's that it's him growing up in proximity, such close proximity to your culture and your language, but also if he looks very white, then you know people won't perceive him as being Asian, or like they might, but just white passing enough that they would still, I don't know, treat him accordingly or talk to him in a certain way. You know, like he's not gonna get. I mean, he probably still will, because he probably will look a bit ambiguous, but, you know, like, people constantly asking you, like, where are you from? Like, things like that, like, being fetishized as an Asian person, or, like, constantly seen as, like, exotic, or pretty for an Asian, like, all of those, like, stupid things that you have to deal with, like, it's like a double-edged sword, if you will.
Not a knife not a knife with two swords.
A knife with two swords, if you will. Where it's like, I don't want him to, you know, have to struggle ever, you know, you don't want that for your kids, you don't want them to hurt, you don't want them to feel embarrassed, but it's also like, I don't want that side of him to be erased. And maybe this is like my ego, but it's also, it feels like if that side of him is erased, or if people don't see him as a half Vietnamese person, then it's like, I don't exist, you know, and maybe that is just something that I need to work out for myself, and I'm young, and I don't know, I'm still working on all of these things.
But that's completely fair, and we even took that into account with naming him.
Yeah, I mean, he has a Serbian last name. Yeah, he does have a Vietnamese middle name, but I mean, no one really knows your middle name unless you're, like, intimate.
Yeah, I guess so. But yeah, with his first name, too, we didn't have it tied to any race. Like, it's not a Serbian name, it's not a Vietnamese name, it's just
that's why we've also talked about like if we were to get married, and like the potential possibility of me changing my last name, and I was like, hell to the fuck no, because I'm not gonna be Nina Stanic. Who is that Serbian woman?
Yeah, Nina's a very common Serbian name too, so yeah, if anyone saw it just written down, they would just automatically assume you were Serbian.
Yeah, it'd be so weird. I would have a massive identity crisis. But also, just like, my mom never changed her maiden name. It's not a very common thing to my understanding, with the people that I knew growing up, and so I on that topic, I won't be changing my last name if we ever do get married, and we're okay with that. We used to argue about that quite a bit, but yeah, I think like I try really hard. I like cling.
It was only important to my ego, and then I realized like, yeah, it's not. It's very unfair to you.
I like built a whole life, a whole identity as Nina Huynh, you know. So yeah, like I cling to anything that ties me to my identity and my culture. Yeah. And I think that's why.
And I don't want you to lose that, and I don't want our child to lose that as well. I want them to know, like, both sides. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah. So yeah, all I wanted to really say about this segment was just that it is important how people do perceive your child, and that's why I do think it's important when you're at home, because you can't control what other people will say to him or how they'll treat him, you know, but you can control the way that you have him understand his race, his identity. And I think being able to talk about it and like show him that it's amazing that he can grow up with two cultures, two languages, that's so cool, you know? Yeah. Like, it's honestly amazing. And I mean, I'm so proud to be a Vietnamese person and all that comes with it, and I hope that I can share that with him and have him understand that, you know, people might ask you things because either they're afraid, they don't understand. It might come from a place of like malice, or it might just come from a place of curiosity. And it doesn't really matter at the end of the day where it comes from, but I think for him to understand and be confident in who he is and not needing to seek that approval from other people, or no matter what reactions you're met with when you do disclose what your identity is, that you don't let that phase what it is you know to be true about yourself. I think he just really needs a very strong understanding of self, so that, yeah, when people come at him, then it's not enough to sway him.
Yeah.
Cause,
or like offend him really in any way.
Yeah. Because I don't know that I personally even had a very strong sense of self, because I didn't really have anybody to guide me. Like, obviously we both have, I mean, kind of similar experiences with this, where both of our sets of parents came from Serbia and Vietnam. And so we grew up with parents that had pretty strong senses of self. You know, like for my parents, they're Vietnamese people that grew up in Vietnam, and then they came to America and then became American. So, you know, they probably are dealing with that struggle, but it's much more pronounced when you're a child that is growing up within American culture, but also with parents that are not from there, because you have, you know, like the difference in accents, in language, in culture, and it's so stark. And like, that's another thing that is going to be so different between our experience growing up with our parents versus his experience growing up with us, because we are culturally American Canadian.
Yeah. And
so there are a lot of ways in which we may understand him better than our parents understood us. Because I can't imagine what it would be like for us to move to, say, I don't know, South Africa, you know, and then like he's being raised as a South African Vietnamese Serbian person. And we don't know.
Completely different.
Yeah, and we don't know because we're culturally not South African.
Yeah.
You know, so like that's another, I guess, generational difference that we may connect with better. I don't know. It's just so different. I think our relationship with Blue is going to be quite different from our relationship to our parents growing up. Also because we're like young and hip and cool, but...
Yeah, I mean, there's that too, right?
No shade.
Yeah, I think it's just like... It's just like going with the flow and like being able to just like be like, you know, be able to adapt and try and understand him and everything that he's going through. And
I think just like open dialogue.
Exactly.
It's a safe space, you know, and like we're not going to understand everything, and I don't think that we should try to. I don't think that it's helpful, you know, when you're going through something, people are like, yeah, like I know how you feel, when you clearly fucking don't. Yeah. So I don't think it's
there's going to be certain things that, like, he'll want to turn to either me or turn to you for, you know what I mean? And it's like, yeah, like, for, you know, there's going to be a lot of things that I won't understand, and there's going to be a lot of things that you won't understand, but, like, he'll turn to one or the other parent, and it's very important for us not to, like, you know, put our ego in the way. And,
like, that's the thing, is that kids will always have favorites, but outside of that, like, I think it's very fair that as a biracial and mixed race person, that one day or 1 week you might feel closer to one identity and the next week you might not, and that's just a whole lifelong battle, or not even a battle, that's just a lifelong state of being. And I think that it definitely should not be tied to ego, or for me, like, the thing is, like, I want him to understand where he came from and where his ancestors came from, but I can't control whether or not he identifies more culturally with being Serbian or being Vietnamese, and, like, I shouldn't allow my feelings about my own identity conflict with his journey to finding his own identity. Yeah. You know, like, I want him, I think where I was saying before that, like, that it feels selfish, or, like, that I want him to, like, I guess, understand being Vietnamese. It's not about choosing that over being Serbian or, like, identifying with it more. It's just being presented with all of the cards and being able to make a decision from there. Like, I want him to have as much exposure to his Vietnamese culture as his Serbian culture, and I'm just gonna have to work extra hard because I'm really the only fucking ambassador here for it.
No, you have your parents too.
I mean, I do, but they're not. It's very different. It's very different being raised around. Like, I remember, like, being raised around.
But I got you too. I fuck with, you know, Vietnamese stuff. You know, I'll be there. I'll be there to, like, you know, have them understand. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but it's more than just food, you know? Like, it's,
It's, I mean, also we have to consider like his willingness to want to learn, you know, and when he's willing to, because yeah, you can't like force any of that stuff down his throat, you know what I mean? I can't like sit down, let me teach you about Serbian history, you know what I mean? Like
you can try, but he may just walk away. Yeah.
That's the thing, and we just have to like not take offense as well. He's gonna just be
straight up Canadian.
Yeah, he could just be like, and that's the thing too, like from like how I am compared to my parents, like yeah, like I embrace the Serbian culture, but in the same time, I definitely like indulge myself in, you know, just like who I see myself and who I want to become. Do you know what I mean? And it wasn't like, you know, some people go a different route. Like, you know, my brother really loves listening to Serbian music and like really sticking to the roots, you know, as much as possible. Whereas I saw it for what it was. I appreciated it. It is a part of me, but in the same time, I kind of became my own, you know, I kind of went my own route, and it wasn't like tied to, you know, this is me, I should be Serbian, I should be belonging to the Serbian community. I felt like I didn't want to go that route. I just wanted to be, you know, open. I think that's another good approach that I think we can teach Blue, where it's like he doesn't have to necessarily be tied to, you know, am I going to be a Vietnamese like person, or am I gonna be a Serbian person, or do I try and embrace both in the same time?
You definitely should not choose one or the other, because that's not reality. The reality is he's both.
Yeah, but as I think some people try to, but like find that sense of belonging, like, oh, like I found this community of Serbian people and I want to be there. I found this community of Vietnamese people and I want to like just stick to that. I think it's important for him to just do what feels right for him, and not, it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to any of those cultures, you know what I mean? He can go any which direction. He'll probably
find a crew of just mixed race kids.
Exactly. But that's what I'm saying. Like when it comes to me and you as well, like we are, you know, I'm culturally Serbian and you're culturally Vietnamese, but like we're also, you know, our own like thing. We're not, you know, if I go back to Serbia, I'm not necessarily like, you know,
you will never be Serbian enough, and I will never be Vietnamese enough.
That's and we're not mixed, but like we're still technically not that.
Now that I think of it, like I remember, like growing up, I always just said that I was Vietnamese. Like I never said I was Vietnamese American or anything like that, because growing up in America, I just felt so different that I was like, I am Vietnamese. I'm not like all these other people that identify themselves as American. And so that was just how I identified myself. And then it wasn't until I went to UBC, went to college, and people would ask me, you know, because I was in a jumpstart program, so it's like all the international kids, like you come like 2 weeks early for school, before school, and you like meet each other and like get acquainted with like Canada. And so everyone's asking like, where are you from? And I would be like, oh, like I'm Vietnamese. And they're like, oh my god, like you're from Vietnam? And I'm like, no, I'm American. I'm American.
But it's like, it's such a difference.
It was so different. Like it was so weird to me. Like, and that was the first time in my life where I really claimed America, you know, and I'd never done that before. But it wasn't until I really had, you know, I even met people that were actually from Vietnam that I was like, oh, we are very different culturally. Like I am very, very, very culturally American. And that's when I started to actually identify as Vietnamese American, and then now Vietnamese American Canadian. But yeah, it's really interesting just how identity works. And you would think that, you know, by the time you're 20, that, or at least at that age, I thought that by the time I was 20, I would have had it figured out by then. But life always throws you a curveball. Yeah. And like even now, you know, like now I sit a lot better in my own identity, but there are still times where I'm like, oh, like, you know, you gotta learn the language so that you can be more Vietnamese. But that's the thing, is that I don't have to prove myself to anybody. I am what I am, and being Vietnamese American Canadian is whatever I decide to make it. And it would just be awesome if I knew the language, but
how much does that? How much does that even really benefit us? Because like even me knowing Serbian, like how much does it really benefit me?
No, it's dope. It's dope to be bilingual or trilingual. Well,
it is because like it is cool, but then like even me, like when I would like be at school and people were like, "Oh, you're Serbian. Like can you speak it? Can you say something?" And then you get that really pressure of like, "What am I gonna say right now?"
But it's not that, B. It's the fact that you don't realize that. You understand TV, you understand the news. We can go to Serbia and you can communicate with the people there. You can read all of the signs. Like, there is so much that is tied to language. But there's so much that is tied to language. And I don't think that it would be, like, I think that if we travel to Vietnam together, it would be a very stark difference when you realize how we travel with you to Serbia versus we travel with me to Vietnam. Like, language is, in my personal opinion, everything. You know, if you think about oral histories, like history is passed down through people through language. And language is very, very important.
Yeah, I can see that now.
Like, once you wipe out...
if I was in Serbia and I didn't know how to speak Serbian, it would have been... Yeah, it would have been tough. It would have definitely hit me in a certain way. Yeah,
so it's just like, I mean, language is very, very important. Yeah. So, yeah, who knows? Maybe one day. Maybe one day we'll do, like, a Vietnamese tag and I'll actually be able to say more than Angam. But who knows?
Yeah. I just feel like, personally, there's not much benefit for having this language here in Canada.
But that's because you're thinking about benefit in terms of, like, I don't know, getting a job or, you know, but, like, I'm talking about connection to your ancestors, connection to 100%. Your culture, to your parents,
sticking to your roots and
to your grandparents. Be the fact that you can communicate with your grandma, and I couldn't talk to my grandparents. I straight up don't know anything about them. I don't even know their first name.
Yeah, that's the perspective I didn't look at. Yeah, I just meant like it's not
outside of your privilege.
Yeah, I just meant like it's something that isn't necessarily like wouldn't add to your resume. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, but that's not what I'm talking about. That's not what's.
But important. Also, if you think about Blue's life, there's not anyone that he wouldn't be able to speak to in English. Do you know what I mean? Like in regards to family.
Yeah, now. But
exactly, like he can speak to his grandparents.
Yeah, he can speak to his grandparents because we've gone down generations enough.
Exactly.
That like the
English, but it is still nice. I do understand that for sure. Yeah. Because like even for me, like it's something as little as like, you know, when I hear the Serbian language or when we go for walks, and in English Bay there is a pretty large Serbian diaspora, but like when I hear it, then I start communicating to them in Serbian. It is kind of nice. Like it's kind of like whoa, like throws you off guard, and you're able to speak. You know, you're able to speak a language that's foreign.
Yeah, I try to do that when I'm, like, at the nail salon or at the Vietnamese restaurant. And then they're like, oh, you're Vietnamese? And I'm like, yeah, but I don't understand. They're like, oh, okay.
It's hard to, like, hold
Or, like, I can't speak it, actually. I can understand it. I can understand way more. But I can't speak because they're two very different skills.
Yeah, they definitely are.
But, yeah. So, I guess the last thing that we can talk about that we didn't touch on yet is traditions. And I guess, like, surprise, surprise, I don't know a ton of Vietnamese traditions. Like, I've tried to ask my mom, like, oh, like, if I was gonna get married, then what should I do? Or, like, what are the traditions? She's like, oh, just everyone does American wedding now. So, and I was like, what the hell? Like, I'm trying to put some culture in there, but it's just, I mean, that's what happens when your parents are the gatekeepers, and it really depends on whether or not your parents be trying to preserve the tradition. And I mean, I think the closest that I felt to tradition would probably be like Vietnamese New Year, which like that is just like huge in Vietnam, and also like growing up in Tenderloin, like the Tenderloin was kind of basically Little Saigon, and they would like close off the streets, and there would be like music and like vendors and food and stuff like that. So I know for sure that I do want Blue to like dress up in his little ao dai, and it would be so cute. It honestly
I remember
be so
seeing
cute.
your lookbook with your cousin. That was so cute.
Yeah, so it's like I want him to have like the traditional dress and like celebrate like Lunar New Year and stuff. But other than that, I don't really know any other traditions. Like, we don't have, like, quinceañeras or, like, coming-of-age things that I know of. Like, I didn't have any of those. To me, it was really just Lunar New Year.
Yeah, I don't know if I really wanted to do any traditional Serbian stuff, because I just remember how, like, rough that was for me growing up. Like, I didn't want to do them. Like, the dance moves and, like, folklore and, like, all that stuff. Like, I wasn't into that. And I don't want to force that.
Is it like a celebration thing, or is it just, like, you just learn about folklore?
Well, you have folklore dance, which you can take at the community center. And that was something that my parents never really forced on me, but they would always be like, come watch, like, them perform and stuff. And it would be, like, kids my age who, like, you know, signed up for it or, like, actually got forced by their parents. And, like, I just never really was, like, interested in wanting to see it. And then also whenever you go to, like, a wedding or, like, a celebration, you'll do, like, those type of, they call the dances kolo. And I, like, just hated participating in it, because like basically you just like jump around. I mean, there's like a certain footwork to it, but like I just like didn't like it. But would you give Blue
the opportunity? Would you present him with it without being like, this shit's lame though?
Would I present him with the opportunity? See, that's the thing. I feel like that is something that he'll probably do with the grandparents and not necessarily with me.
I don't know. I feel like...
Because I personally still don't enjoy it.
Yeah, but you don't enjoy it. But what if he enjoys it? You should still give him the in my opinion, you should give him the opportunity. And, like, I've realized, actually, now that I didn't answer a question earlier where you said, would I put him, like, into a school or something?
Yeah.
I actually did have some friends that went to a Vietnamese school. They do know Vietnamese now to this day. So I would probably give him the option to, and unless he really hated it, you know, which me and my brother, like, really hated it. So, like, I think we only went once or something. And it also cost money. So then my mom was like, ah, it's fine. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, I think I would probably want him to go because... I want him to have the opportunity to, if he wanted to. And if he decides that he hates it, I'm not going to tell him I hate it and I didn't do it, because that would obviously frame how he's going to go into it. Yeah, so like with the folklore dance, you know, if you say you can, but I hate it and I would never, I would never do it, then obviously he's not going to want to do it, you know? So I think that you should present him with all the opportunities the same way that you had the opportunity to make a decision for yourself that it wasn't for you. Yeah, I don't think you should make that decision for him, because he might then like start to build a sense of identity based on your disdain for something. And I don't think that that's fair.
Yeah, so I guess I'll have to take him out to some of those events that I don't
just
actually
see, he might
enjoy,
start hopping around and you're like, oh, we got a little Serbian folklore dancer in our fam.
Man. Yeah, that's true. It might just happen.
Yeah.
We'll see.
All right, well...
I mean, I'm excited for him to grow up and what we'll do and what events we'll take him to and stuff.
Yeah.
But.
I think that's the thing, too, is that it doesn't always... It shouldn't always be, like, drilled and, like, shoved down your throat that, like, this is your culture, you know? Like, I think that, especially with children, like, they do need the opportunity to just explore and do what it is that they want to do, just like with anything else. And this is also, like, kind of on a similar thread, but not really, how I feel about, like, Hollywood and their depiction of Asians or how they cast Asians is, like, if there is an Asian person that's a lead or something, it's always about them being Asian. And that's why I loved, like, To All the Boys I've Loved Before so much, is because she was just an Asian girl that had a crush and just had a very regular storyline, you know? I think it's important. It wasn't
focused on her being Asian.
Yeah, like, I think it's really important to tell the stories of Asian people as it's tied to their race. Like, that's important too, but it's also important to have stories where you're just, like, a normal kid, you know? Like, sometimes you just want to feel normal. You don't want to always have everything be tied to your race, you know? And, like, I feel like this is, like, a whole conversation in and of itself, because I have tangents that I can go on because I'm thinking of so many other things. But yeah, like, I don't think that we should be shoving down his throat constantly, like, what do you feel culturally? What do you want to do culturally Serbian, culturally Vietnamese, you know? Like, I think it's just activities are activities, and, like, just providing him with all of the tools and all of the resources and opportunities, and just allowing him to direct the conversation however he feels, outside of our ego, outside of our own experiences with it, you know? Because now I'm realizing, after we've had this conversation, that we both have a lot of baggage that we both need to work on when it comes to our own cultures. Identity. Yeah, our own identity and our own cultures. And I don't want to project that onto him. And I hope that we kind of get that more sorted before he's, like, at an age where it's like these questions are really coming up. But it's, yeah, like I said, it's a lifelong battle. And I just want to be sure that we're just not making the decisions for him. Yeah. That he has every right to come up with his own sense of self.
His own little fusion.
Yeah.
His own little Chavapi Banh Mi.
Chavapi Banh Mi. I also did that as a hashtag and nothing existed. So I'm like, yo, it's fine. We actually made Chavapi Banh Mi's when my mom came to visit.
When our parents met for the first time.
Yeah, when my mom met
your mom, parents, yeah. So your mom came, and then we were like, let's make banh mi. But then we were like, let's actually have my parents involved and then add Chavapi. And then put it as, like, the meat, and it's like a chavapi banh mi. It was so good. Yeah. If y'all don't know what a banh mi is or a chavapi, just Google it. They're pretty traditional to each of our cultures, but basically we fused it together, and it was the bombest thing ever. Yeah, it was amazing. Highly suggest.
All right. Well, I think this is a good place to end the pod. Yeah, we had such an insightful conversation. I feel like it went further than we've ever had it before. these podcasts always, I feel like, push us because we have these conversations, but because we know that you guys want that good content, then we push ourselves really hard to like dig deep. Really, really dig deep. So yeah, I mean, these podcasts are for you guys, but they're also for us, you know, to like take the time to think introspectively and retrospectively. And I honestly feel like it's really helped us, and it's actually really cool that we're able to do this as we're going on this journey because we learn a lot about ourselves and each other through this process. But anyways, you can find us on Instagram at Neens Deens. We really need to get our Instagram back and poppin'.
We're in the midst of a move. We're in the midst of a few different things right now, but
the IG content will be back on point soon, I promise. But you can also follow us at Your Girl Neens, and that my IG is way more poppin'. Yeah. I post on it a lot more than Neens and Deens, but like I said, it will get back on track, I promise.
And you can follow me at Dayon's Day Off,
and we'll see you guys next week.
Stay tuned. Bye.
So this is Nook Mommy signing out,
and this is Chavapi Poppy over and out.
You're so lame.